Hi everybody, Lee Scott here. Thank you for watching and or listening to this week's episode of Leading with Lee. If you have not done it yet, go and subscribe today on YouTube and all podcasting platforms today. So today I have a very special guest. She is a wonderful person. She is literally family to me. I love her so much and I admire her so much. She's a huge influence to me. She is a college professor. She is a department head at Jackson State University, running the English department. And more than ever, which is so cool to me, which I am so proud of her. She is the first lady of my hometown. Please welcome the illustrious Dr. Ebony Lumumba. Hey, Eb.
Thank you. Hey, I want to call you what I normally call you. Is that appropriate?
It's fine.
I don't
it's
call
fine.
you Lee. I want to call you Drew. Okay?
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. If you call me Drew this whole time, I'm not unbothered and unfazed by it because, I mean, we're family. So
thank you. My old brain can't accept new names. So yeah. Hi, Drew. It's nice to be with you virtually.
Great. So let's jump in real quick. So how are you doing? I know we're still kind of in the pandemic. I mean, a lot of states are opening up, obviously. But how are you doing? How's family life? And how has teaching been for you? You've changed quite a few schools in the last few years too.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I love sort of mental, physical, spiritual check-ins at the beginning of any type of session. So I'm feeling good, extremely blessed. We are healthy, which is, primary, and I'm so grateful for that. And we are managing as best we can in the midst of just these uncertain and unconventional times. It has made us really grateful. So every day is a gift. And teaching has been, this has been one of the most challenging moments in my teaching career. So I was at Tougaloo College as professor of English and department chair for 7 years service, 5.5 years as chair. And then just last year, I decided in the midst of a global pandemic to take on a new job, at a new university. So I went across town to our other HBCU here locally, and it has been a gnarly year. There has been no shortage of obstacles and hurdles to surmount and overcome, but I take a sort of a moment from my dad, which he describes these sorts of circumstances as character building. So there's always an opportunity to build and to grow and to sharpen. And that's kind of how I've been trying to take on everything that's been happening this year. And it's a very strange time, especially for educators, that we're not in the classroom with our students. We're not even in the same building with our colleagues most of the time during the pandemic. And so it has forced us to pivot and to really dig deep for those skills that we built over all of these years to still be able to guide the educational process. So it's something that I'm still sharpening, still honing, still trying to figure out best practices for. And I want to leave this pandemic with some skills that I earned or gained through this pandemic. So
I think
that's where I am.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. I mean, as you well know, because we will talk about it more as this conversation goes on, it was a challenge for everyone to really make that mind shift. I even know for me, I mean, throughout, I was in grad school the whole pandemic. So, imagine from a student's perspective, how it is trying to figure out, especially for me, especially being older, you're trying to navigate having a full-time job and trying to navigate all the responsibilities of life while going to school online. And there were several of my classmates who were, 5-10 years my senior and maybe even older, who are now navigating being in the classroom in a hybrid type of setting. And so that's interesting that you were experiencing that. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. But as it relates to that specific thing, Eb, how were you taking time to maintain kind of balance and actually doing some self-care? Because I think that's super important for you.
Yeah, that is, it has become even more central to just maintaining. I realize that I am accountable to a lot of people and I have a number of responsibilities, but I can't perform any of those responsibilities well. And I can't serve any of the folks who are depending on me, my husband, my children, my students, my family, my colleagues. I cannot serve them adequately if I am diminished or depleted. And so I really am sort of grateful, right, for what the pandemic did in terms of forcing us to be alone sometimes that we would not have been, forcing us to turn down obligations, to stop traveling, sit down somewhere, as you know, my mama might say. And
Yes, you
I
would.
was able, yeah, you know my mama, so she has told you that. But it really allowed for me to center in on how critical my self-care for myself was. And so I have taken up, I've been more accountable to myself with my writing. I have been more diligent about creating art. So I've taken up painting and launched a whole uh, e-commerce venture with stationery that lifts the likenesses of Black women and girls. And for me, producing that art has been so sustaining. It has been so therapeutic. And my children have kind of gotten into producing their own art. And my husband has been tremendously supportive. And so we've just been able to take more time for ourselves separately and collectively. And I'm taking that out of this pandemic too, right?
Yeah.
Being able to say no to certain asks, being able to stay at home for extended amounts of time, and not feeling guilty about centering myself and taking a nap, or, you know, just sitting down and doing something mindless or creative so that I can kind of balance my energy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're tapping into something that I think is essential and critical for leaders, is that you
Yeah.
have to have that balance of doing the work that you do, doing everything that you're engaged in, but actually giving your brain and yourself some space to rest. And how
Yeah.
we rest may look different for different people, right? You know, rest may look like, for you it's painting, for somebody else it may be reading a good book, for another person it might be them actually investing time or money into going to, you know, a certain place or whatever. That is a very healthy thing, and I think that's really great, and I think that gives young people like me some more perspective about why that is essential and necessary. So something key you kind of talked about there with maintaining balance. I wonder sometimes, what is that like for you now? Because with changing jobs, with being a parent, and you're in the educational space, so you see a lot of different things happening, right? What has your
Mhm.
perspective been as an educator of the impact of what's been happening in the pandemic? And then also, what has been your perspective as a parent? Because you're on both sides, right? How
Yeah.
how has that experience been, and how have you navigated that throughout this pandemic?
Wow. So that's such a loaded question, because you're correct. I'm on both sides of it. So most of the time I'm in higher ed as a professional, but then I'm also in first grade with my 6-year old, my 7-year old now, who's doing virtual learning, right? Trying to
Which is
her.
crazy that she's
It's
7.
crazy. Yeah, I know. I know. 7 years old and completely grown. But it has made me, I've been grateful, right? Like, so the virtual learning space is difficult, I think, for all parties involved, folks that are trying to be administrators in that realm, folks who are trying to be educators, folks, learners, everyone. It's a challenge on all sides. And so in terms of parenting, one of the things that I'm grateful for, and you'll hear me say grateful and gratitude a whole lot, because that is just where I have landed
Yeah.
as the result of this pandemic. And I think it is such a fruitful space. But I'm truly grateful for being able to witness my oldest child, who's the only school age child that we have, witness her educational journey in a more in-depth and intimate way.
Yeah.
So, you know, before we were, you know, sending her to school in the morning, picking her up in the afternoon, maybe helping with a little homework here and there. But there was this huge gap in the day that, you know, we weren't a part of. And so now, of course, the pandemic with her doing virtual and distance learning has forced us to be involved in this process. And I realize now that her learning experience has become a part of our day in a way that it wasn't before. And so, and then I also realized the disparities, right, and associated with that, because we have a certain amount of privilege to be able to be here with her, or for her to come and be in my office in a corner and do her virtual class. And there's so many parents and caregivers who don't have that privilege. And so it really also allowed me to more deliberately and diligently hone into these disparities that we don't even account for,
Yeah.
and the parents that do not have the support. necessary to be assets to their children's educational journey. So it's something that I'm thinking about. I have my nonprofit, which focuses specifically on mothers who are obtaining their undergraduate or graduate degrees. And so that's another component that now I'm mindful to build. How do I not only support these mothers, these student mothers in their educational journeys, but also give them some tools that helps them to support their children's educational journey. So we begin these cycles of progress and prosperity. And one of the things I've been able to do to that extent is to work with Spelman, my alma mater, to guide young people who are in their undergraduate journeys with developing reading literacy podcasts for parents to use with their children. Wow. And so that's some of the work that I'm focused on my personal, mama end. And on the professional side, I've really been most focused on being very clear on the mental and emotional balance of my colleagues, as they're called upon to not only be educators, but oftentimes, especially in an HBCU environment, we are mentors and counselors, and we become these sort of extended family members for some of our students, and that's heavy. It's rewarding, but it's heavy. And so I've been thinking about what professional development looks like beyond developing the professional self and being focused on, the holistic individual. How do we maintain this sort of balance for these folks who are on a different type of front line? And it's going to be critical as to their work product is critical to so many populations. And there are not a lot of jobs like that, right? That what you produce will affect generations of people. That's a heavy load. And so that's kind of where I am, always just thinking about what's next and how we sustain, how we manage, how we stay healthy in the global sense of staying healthy, not just physically, right? And kind of develop a model that is self-empowering, but also community empowering.
Yeah, everything you said was so rich, because I think what a lot of people don't understand is the key point you said about the issues in education. And how there's so much distance between somebody literally just getting there. I don't think actually people realize that we are still in a time where people are still first generation college students, like first generation graduates, first generations that, like we were talking about this before I started recording, how even in my own life, my parents don't have bachelor's degrees. My parents, not only they don't have bachelor's degrees, they hadn't even smelled what a master's looks like. So it's, and then considering the fact that my grandparents, literally my literal grandparents, both of my grandfathers only finished about third or fourth grade. My grandmothers maybe graduated from high school. So you realize how the acceleration of that happens when somebody gets an opportunity to go to college and do that. And there is a weight and a responsibility that those individuals feel, because they see themselves as, hey, I am the key, or I am the linchpin by which our family will go forward, right? And that's very difficult. And I can only imagine some of the conversations you've had with students about being first generation, college students, or first generation. I mean, just the act of them getting there. Like I can only imagine.
That, and honestly, that's something that I think about, and it excites me because I have so many students, former students, current students, future students who will still be first generation. And there is an obvious inequity there. And the reason that I get excited about that, because I am not far removed from that reality as well, right? Like my mom obtained her bachelor's degree the exact same day that I got my master's. And so hers was delayed, right?
Wow.
Yeah, hers was delayed. And at that point, it was still this inspiration to us, her children. Certainly my grandparents never attended college, but some of the wisest people that I've ever known, right? I still draw this sort of encouragement, power, and energy from my grandmother and my grandfather. They're everywhere in my writing, both my academic and creative writing, in my art. because of the profound impact that they had, not only on my life, but on the lives of all, my cousins and aunts and uncles, their children. And so I say that to say, for those of us who have had the opportunity and we have been able to sustain in this very hegemonic educational system, right? An educational system that does not consider Black and Brown communities, does not consider minorities, does not consider economic disparities in the way that it should, then now the onus is also on us to refashion the academy, refashion educational systems in secondary and elementary, to look more like the communities that it's serving, to be more relevant to the lived experiences of the people who are encountering these systems. And so I literally just had a meeting yesterday with a colleague in Maine about how we make classrooms more open to student engagement and formation, right? Like how we pull from what our students' experiences have been in order to still teach this content, but for them to feel included, for them to feel that this is specifically designed for them, so that we don't have all of these elements of failure and all of these elements of, what standardized testing does to or doesn't do for minority and disenfranchised and underserved communities. Now it's time for these classrooms to look like the classrooms that our grandparents set up for us unintentionally with their wisdom.
Yes. If you're about to make me go somewhere in this conversation that I was not planning on going.
Let's go.
Because that is a critical piece of information. When we talk specifically about education, one of the major issues, you hit it right on the head, is there is no understanding of diversity and understanding of how what I should teach the people should reflect their values and what they face, right?
Yeah.
One of the things, and I'm just gonna say this one thing about that, and I've been thinking about this a lot even lately, is we hadn't even created education systems, or we have not reformed education. And maybe I'm just throw this out this to you because my next question is related to this. But when it comes down to education, I've noticed we don't even think about education as K to career. Like we don't even think in that regard. We just think, if we just get through the standardized test, it's it. But it's like these people have to live lives beyond the 12 years that you have with them. So how are you actually preparing them for a life? Like, I mean, you know this just as well as I know this. They start looking at kids in third grade to see how far they're going to go in life, right?
Yeah.
And right, we're not going to go on a whole tangent about why they build prisons and stuff like that based on the third grade test.
Yeah.
That's not what this conversation's about.
It's real.
Yes, it is a very real thing, and it's something that we literally have to deconstruct and actually push systems. And not only that, consider the fact that and I'm talking to an educator, so you already know these things, but I'm telling other people this. I think people don't realize the underinvestment that happens in the education system is so large.
It's routine. It's routine, and it reflects the devaluing that happens across the board in our nation specifically. Like let's just talk Western world and America. The lack of funding and support for educational opportunities for the people who have been denied generationally access to formal education it's criminal.
Yep.
It's criminal. And it's so routine that we overlook it, we accept it, and when we push back on it, there is no sort of fire underneath our legislators and lawmakers to actually respond to that pushback. Yes. They can, kind of throw it out, be flippant about it, throw us a few bones, a few $1 million to HBCUs, and we're supposed to be happy. But it's become so commonplace because if we think about, the inception of formal education in this country, it was not designed for Black people. It was not designed for minorities. It was not designed for women. And so we have venerated that model. We still celebrate those institutions that were founded based on that model.
Yep.
And those are still the pinnacle of success. They're still, their names are still the marker of how prestigious you can be
Right.
in the realm of education. And so that's something that we have to think about when we talk about, well, I say we, but when I talk about decolonizing, right, the academy, then, you know, we have to move into a space where we decenter these narratives that do not celebrate and affirm the lives of folks who have every right to have access to these institutions that we built with our hands, or our ancestors built with their hands,
Well,
that were sustained because we were feeding the people at
yep.
the institutions. Hello, that, you know, Thomas Jefferson could be such a statesman and such a scholar because he owned over 400 people.
Yep.
So I know that's not where we were going, but
well, you
here
know,
we are.
here we are. You know, I am not gonna tell you not to stop telling the truth. Anyways, the point, I think that's you listen. I have no responses to that. All I'm going to say is, as it relates to that, how do you think we can innovate in that space? Because it seems like the innovation is not going to come from the people that have the power to do it. What do you think education is going to look like going forward? Do you think it's going to revert back to the same old system, or do you think that there's going to be some transformation that has to happen? And I'm going to give a caveat real quick, because this is something that I always think about, especially in our home state of Mississippi. What drives me insane is the fact that you got people out here pushing charter schools. And I understand the point of them. I get it. But one of my biggest issues with charter schools in Mississippi and in America is most people actually don't know that charter schools are privately and publicly funded. So therefore, you're taking public dollars from communities and pulling them out, and then taking the kids that actually have the aptitude to learn information from those schools. So it's not creating an environment where it's pushing other kids to grow and learn. So you're literally robbing public schools of the opportunity to actually be effective, because you're not actually giving them the resources to do what they need to do. And not to consider the fact, as you well know, Mississippi hadn't even fully funded education since 2007. So that's not even when I was in 7th grade. So let's not even get on that fact. And then considering the fact that I got on a rant, but considering the fact that at the same time, we are funding schools based on property tax, which makes absolutely no sense.
It's racist.
Right. And then you have the other thing where, based on how we value property in America, and, you know, I'm going to get some people a book real quick, and I know we're not talking about this, but people need to read The Color of the Law. That book, when it deconstructs and talks about literally housing in America and how the suburbs were created in America, it will literally mess so many people up to actually understand the inequity that has happened over generations because of that, because of one action, housing, how housing was literally given to folks. And we're not even talking about that, but I need you to answer the question as it relates.
It's all connected. It's all connected.
It is, but you know, how do you think education is going to go forward? Do you think it's going to revert back, or do you think there's some innovative things that's going to happen?
So here's the thing, you know, I'm not a soothsayer or a prophet, so who knows, right? But I will talk about what my hopes are and the work that I'm doing to contribute to those hopes manifesting. So, you know, my hope for education as it progresses, right, as we move forward, is that we empower our learners, that we make it more equitable. You spent a lovely moment on charter schools, and I agree with your sentiments. It's not a model that works for us here, because we have so many families whose only access will be public schools. Why not make those schools equitable? Why not make those schools accessible to as many folks as possible, and then make them adequate and effective, right? Let's spend our money there so that we spread this access to knowledge even further. It can only stand to benefit us. We went through a really scary time when Chokwe first took office. We were under the threat of our school system being taken over by the state. And I remember that. In that, it's a school system that both of us are products of, right? But
Merle, baby. Yes, sir. 1400.
Murrah Mustangs. Hello. Roll blue. But
Right.
in that moment, some of the things that I would say to people is, let me be clear. I'm not fighting this, and I am not pushing back, and I'm not showing up to all these meetings and doing this, supporting this work against the state taking over because I'm worried about my child.
Right.
Because my children, and we only have one at the time, my children are going to be fine, but I am concerned for their peers. I am concerned for the world that they will grow into. And if they don't have peers that can compete at the same level or a higher level, then what type of community are we building? What type of future world are we setting in place to intentionally regress the progress of generations of students and families? And we understand that the education of one person has an effect on their generations. You talked about your grandfather. I talked about my grandparents, and the lack of access that they had to formal education was less of a hindrance because they had dedicated people in their lives to guide their progress. Now, if they had had access to formal education, who knows where we would be
Right.
now? Who knows how much farther we would have gone? Who knows how much more ground we would have been able to cover? And so my hope is that, one, we become more equitable and understand this right to know, this right of education, this right of knowledge that we should all have access to. And we need to fight like heck to make sure that our children have the access. Access is one of the greatest divides between the haves and the have-nots. And so it is not because students who have been able, have generations of Harvard graduates and generations of Yale graduates, it's not because they're smarter. It's because they've had the access. And so I want education to look like building these networks. We often use this adage, it's not, what you know, but it's who you know. It's both, right?
Right.
And so we know a lot, but without having the networks, we're going to be stagnant. And so I want education to look like building networks. I want education to look like equity for every single child that wants it, every single family that wants access to it. No one should be denied it, and it should be adequate. We've been having this conversation. We've been arguing about this for generations, and there's no argument there. It is justice to allow people wisdom, right? If the Lord can grant wisdom liberally, we can't do it. It's,
Don't make me
it's
go in there.
it's mind-boggling. It's
Don't make me go in. I will go in.
So, this conversation that I had with my colleague from Maine, we also talked about, how we need to decolonize our own minds and the way that we as academics have been trained to structure the classroom. And so we've been trained to develop these course syllabi and these structured course schedules, and to demand that students have access and proficiency in these specific canons, because that's what is expected. I have to, as a literary critic, as a literature PhD, I have to know the British literary canon. I have to know the American literary canon. I have to know the accepted African-American literary canon. But how many souls and stories and narratives are left out? And so we continue to produce these generations of folks who are all about exclusion. And we need to, we need to empower learners to understand the classroom is a space where we are encouraging growth. Yeah. And if we are encouraging growth, it's not only your growth, but as the professor, as the instructor, as the guide, it's my growth as well. And so we have to move out of these sort of, I hope that education moves out of these strictures of this is the content and this is all that matters. It's not all that matters. I hope that we develop a model of intellectual curiosity. Yeah. I hope we develop a model of information literacy so that we don't have to say, hey, this is fake news, or this is real news, or this is credible, or this is not credible, but I give you the skills to do that on your own. Yeah. And then we become more focused on understanding that you have the capability, and I'm affirming your experience. What you came here knowing is as valuable as what you will leave here knowing. Yeah. All of that matters, and it all should exist in tandem. So that's just a nugget of what I'm hoping for education in its future.
And I'm in agreement with you. I think that is where we have to push people, because a lot of times we don't even understand the fact that, like, some people hadn't even written their own narratives. Like, they just simply did not have the access to write their own narratives. So therefore, how could we even know the story?
Yeah, and we won't ever. And that's the intention. The
Yeah,
intention is that you never hear the true story
yeah,
and that you get mediated single stories. And when people can write your story for you, they can say anything about you that they want to, and
yeah.
will be accepted as truth. How dangerous is that?
Woo. And I know for me, I promise you, I'm gonna do everything in my power to write my own story so that nobody can take or actually have the right to actually put value on what I said because I wrote it.
Yeah.
It became value because it came from the original source. You know, that's one thing that you hit on there that I think that we have to be willing to do. And I think from a leadership perspective, I want you to kind of talk about that because how do we get people to write their own stories? How do we get people to a place where they recognize there is value in what they have experienced in their lives, no matter if they're a janitor or a professor or, you know, a significant person? How do we get people to make that mind shift and not devalue what their narrative is? Because I think there's a problem in whose narratives that we value. Kind of like that.
Oh, I mean, so again, as someone who studies literature, that's the center point of, I think, likely why I got into this field, because it was this, what led me here was reading Toni Morrison's Beloved as a senior in high school at Murrah.
Mm.
And I was so struck by this Black woman's work that was telling this story that encompassed all of this beauty and all of this pain and all of this survival and all of these obstacles in tandem. It was so beautifully written, and it defied conventions of literature, but the story was so authentic. And to come to know, you know, with that story, for anyone who has read it or knows anything about it, she was sort of reimagining the story of Margaret Garner, a real woman, in her manifestation of Setha. And so at that young age, like at 17, 18, it caused me to think that, wow, how many other stories do we need to grasp on in sort of this Sankofa mode of our ancestors, of our cultural heritage, and one, imagine for ourselves, because so many of the facts have been stolen, never to be recovered. But that doesn't mean that we can't have what Morrison calls this sort of rememory, right? Like this feeling of experiencing the trauma of an experience that you've never gone through because you live in a similar identity. And so that's what drew me to this work. And in thinking about what you're saying, right, we have to, one, acknowledge that there is privilege to being recorded. And so for folks that study any aspect of history, there is a privilege to your history being documented by your people. And a great many of our people have been denied that privilege, and that's nothing that you can restore, right? And so, you know, as an example, when I was in graduate school, I studied the Haitian Revolution and was, and I still am deeply frustrated, but I was frustrated at that moment as I was writing this research paper to realize that there were no narratives from the insurrectionists. There were no narratives from the Haitian revolutionaries. All of the narratives, all of them, anything documented about that was written by the other side. And so, you know, it forced me to really consider how many, you know, what Chimamanda Adichie calls single stories, how many single stories we have adopted as truth.
Wow.
And how that has annihilated whole, that's genocide in itself. I mean, we have annihilated whole scores of people and histories with this practice. And so moving forward to your question, right, like how we prevent that from continuing, because it's happened. Yeah. And it has damaged, you know, generations of people and communities and cultures. It has. I mean, you look at our Native American population and how much of their history has just been lost to people who should have access to it. And we, you know, we don't, because of the dominant narrative that overtook many of their stories and who they were, and made these movies that everybody fell in love with Kevin Costner in it. And so we're believing that this is what indigenous people look like, ate, and, you know, did, right? That's what has happened. And so, but what we can do now, we're at a really beautiful moment, and I get super amped about this with my students and my colleagues, talking about sort of course and curriculum development, because we're already doing it. And we have all of these wonderful tools that we can use to do it. So people are writing their stories on Twitter.
Yep.
They're writing their stories on Instagram. They're writing their stories on Facebook. They're writing their stories in the notes on their phone. They're writing their stories in their camera roll. Now, here's the thing. My hope is that we become more deliberate and intentional about these stories. One of the exercises that I use in some of my literature surveys with students is, pull up your Instagram and screenshot the last 4 posts. And the last 4 posts are the story of who you are. Who are you?
Wow.
And immediately, like, people's faces are like, ooh, I am at the club. And so, and like, if that's a part of who you are, but all 4 pictures are at the club, okay. So let's diversify that portfolio. But we have these tools that we've never had before. And unfortunately, what I see in my sort of perusal of social media, and I'm not very engaged at all on social media intentionally, but what I try to be a little off the grid. But what I see is folks still relinquishing their authorial role in their story.
Yep.
And so, wow, if we were more intentional, because that's an archive, right? Hashtags are archival materials, because you can trace the hashtag and there's an archive of everything about it. And so if we start to look at these things more intentionally, if we start to build a narrative with everything we do, we were talking just before we started recording about like my cup, and, I was very intentional about my attire, and I'm intentional about my hair and everything that I do that presents, because I understand that that's another line in my story. As minuscule as it may seem or may be, it still is communicating a message about who I am and what I care about. And so my hope is that we harness these tools that are now accessible to so many more of us than, the written word used to be. It was inaccessible to most communities, Black and white. I mean, the low literacy rates in the 19th century, the 18th century in Europe, nobody could read and write but the clergy. And so now that the written word, and as a literary artist and professional, this is going to sound crazy, but we have to decenter in this value that we place on the written word in terms of documenting narratives, because it's not accessible to every community. And so meet people where they are. Some people are telling their stories in graffiti. Some people are telling their stories with murals. Some people are telling their stories with performance art. And some people are telling their stories with food. Let's level the playing field and really start to really breathe in the way that people are communicating who they are and what they value through all of these representations and manifestations.
Yeah, I mean, your answer was fantastic, Ebony. And it made me think about the realities of, diversifying that particular space and tearing our narratives is a huge thing, because I even know for me personally, how I post things or what I do on social media, I'm always thinking about what is people going to be thinking of me 10 years from now. Even when I'm one space I'm extremely intentional is Twitter. I say, if I speak about something, if I say something, I know they're going to get receipts, because I want to be able to say, even if they say, well, you had this position on this, why is it different now? I've already thought about, okay, has my position changed? Have I learned more? Has my position on this particular issue expanded on this particular thing? And I still feel the same way. What am I saying? What is the through line to which people can see the similarities of the consistent message that's coming from me?
Yeah.
Are they seeing some consistency? Because that's one reality too. And with social media, we play that game. We know where our parents, let's just be generationally, we know which platforms our parents are on.
Right.
Some things I ain't about to say on Twitter.
Put everything out there. You're not gonna put everything on Facebook, because great aunt Lucy is on Facebook and she's gonna tell you.
Yes. I'd be like, listen, this is why Instagram is my best friend. Instagram and some of these people be on TikTok and Snapchat doing some crazy stuff. I'm not on either one.
People's lives have been ruined by these outlets.
Yes.
They have. And there's a responsibility in that. And here's the thing, Drew, it should still demonstrate progress, right? When I look at, my IG posts from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 or 5, there is progress, and I'm grateful for that. And we can look at some of the folks that we hold most dear in our history. W.E.B. Du Bois, if you read his early stuff and then his late stuff, that's a different brother. Malcolm X, who is right behind your head.
Yes.
Read his early stuff and his late stuff.
Yes.
That's a different brother. I mean, he's evolved. Martin Luther King, he evolves. And so you have, one of the things that breaks my heart for the generation that I serve in terms of my student population, right, mostly 18 to 24, is that they have very often been denied the right to evolve, or the opportunity to evolve.
Same.
Because what you say now is screenshot, and that's it.
Yes.
And that you're going to feel differently about something.
Right, because it's crazy, and we have seen it happen so much, particularly, and I know we're not talking about cancel culture, but just specifically on 2 seconds. It is interesting that is the truth, because when we think about it, a lot of times people frame their whole beliefs about people based on a post that they made 10 years. Come on now. Yeah. 10 years ago, 17. Like 17-year-old Drew, in this context, 17-year-old Drew is not the same as 27, about to be 28-year-old Lee. Like, not the same. And they shouldn't be. And we should be sympathetic to that. But the problem we have too often is people want an excuse not to accept the totality of an individual. They want to accept only a portion of the individual that they are comfortable with. And we have to understand the necessity for us to grow as people is in our ability to accept a whole person's story and know that it's okay for them to change. Because there's some people right now who have some opinions about some stuff, and we can get into details and get into some specifics about that, but we're not going to because we don't have time, because I got more questions to ask you. But there are some things that people have said and done right now that 5 to 10, 20 years from now, they are not going to have the same belief. Right now, even as a single person who's not married, my girlfriend and I are dating, we've been past a year or so. So, I'm going to have a very different perspective about marriage now.
Oh, gosh, yes.
When I finally decide to get on one knee and make that move, I'm going to have a very different perspective.
You are.
When I'm married to her. Because
every day, though, let me just say this. It's going to be a different perspective at dinner than it is at breakfast the next morning.
Yes.
Because, experience affects your perspective. We have to acknowledge that. And that we are eternally flawed.
Yes. Yes.
And, we have to, grace is such a gift. And, I pray every day for the mindfulness to extend grace to folks that get on my nerve, right? To my children, to my husband, to coworkers, let me just extend to meet folks in the media. Like, I ain't watching that, y'all crazy. Yeah. But, to extend grace because I need it extended to me.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that there isn't something to learn about folks based on their history, but that something to learn isn't necessarily the totality of who they are currently.
Right.
So, it's case by case though. There's just no recipe for how you do that.
And it's definitely case by case because there's some people that have profited from their foolishness, but we're not going to talk about it. They know if they stay in this space of being foolish, it benefits them in some way, shape, form, or fashion when they know it's wrong. And
foolishness pays very well,
which is crazy to me. But that's a whole other conversation. And this is not what we're talking about. We'll talk about the next time if you have an opportunity and have the time. Because when you're on a book tour and stuff, you be too big for us. Anyways, my next question for you, because just moving the conversation along, because I think you've given so much wisdom about how we actually look at education and what we need to do in that space. But let's kind of put some onus on the leaders, right? Because there's a responsibility that you have every day when young women and young men look up to you and say, Dr. Lumumba, I want to do this, but I'm not sure. Like, how are you looking at through your lens as an educator? How are you looking at preparedness? And I'm kind of going to add two questions together. But how are you looking at workplace preparedness, and also how are you looking at just raising up future educators? Like, I say this every time I come in contact with an educator, and I'm going to say it to you, and I mean this. The world will not be able to move forward without educators. You guys are the most, and a lot of times you are the most underappreciated, overworked, underpaid,
Amen.
disrespected individuals in the world, but you all have been the reason why so many successful people are successful, because you gave them access to knowledge. So I'm gonna say thank you first before you answer the question. But I always thank educators, because I realize for me there are some professors who gave me inspiration and encouraged me throughout my college career, and even at some times where I really, really did not have it all together. And they were gracious, and they supported me, and they spoke life to me, and they encouraged me. And even in recent years, like, there have been professors who I to this day love. One of my professors I got a chance to see, I had to go up to ORU to get my tickets for graduation. And I was hoping when I went in that office, I would run into her, and I ran into her. And I was so happy because I ran into her. And we had a whole conversation about the world and what's going on there, and the political climate and social climate and different things like that. And why she was encouraging. She's like, Lee, and she would tell me when I was a student, and she was like, Lee, you need to get involved. The world needs you. She would always encourage me, and I needed to hear that again, even though I'm not her student now. I needed to hear that again, because this woman invested in me. And she was even telling me about a club that I had started at ORU, and I went about my business and forgot about it. She said, this club is still going on. They started it up because she was still there. I said, let's go. Stuff like that.
NXT.
Yes. And it's an encouragement to us students. So my question for you is, how are you looking at trying to propel people like me, young people, into careers? And also, what are your hopes for inspiring future educators to get in the game and actually be part of that process?
Woo, okay. So one, thank you for that lovely compliment and appreciation. Educators do work that will never be spoken of. And I don't think that any of us are looking for, folks who are fundamentally and linked in our soul to this profession are looking for that sort of gratitude, but we appreciate it when it surfaces. So I will say, I get the opportunity to advise and mentor a lot of students in their research, in their matriculation, academically, and in their career discernment. And one of the things that I harp upon with the young people that I get to work with is that my hope is for them to take whatever they can, glean whatever they can from this educational experience, and compose the career that they want to have to respond to the complex world issues that matter to them. Yeah. And so in saying that, what I tell them all the time, we don't need no more professors like me. I'm here. I need you to develop the type of career that is necessary for your world. Yep. We don't need any more physicians like my sister. We don't need any more lawyers or politicians like my husband. We got us. What is going to be your contribution? So look at this opportunity, this educational opportunity, as this sort of a la carte menu that you can put together this career that will nourish you and your community. I don't know what it's going to look like. So I really hope, especially for Black and brown people, that we stop pushing our young people to be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an engineer. Those things are wonderful, admirable, and great. But are we guiding them into, you got to make this money, pay back these loans, and get your big house and your luxury car? All of those things are absolutely fine. I like them. However, I want us to start to, and I try to guide my students in developing these careers that are going to be solved for, a balm for our community, that are going to advocate for our causes, that are going to be the repairers of all of these breaches that we suffer from. That is what we need from you. And so when I give graduation gifts to students, which I typically do to seniors, it's books. It's something that's going to contribute to your continued growth. It is something that is going to speak to something that I've already said. And, sometimes they're like, well, we want to get you something. Your gift to me is using this degree for our people.
Yes.
When I say our, that pronoun, that our, is so wide reaching. Our people are everywhere. Our people are all over this world. Our people look different. So whatever our people look like in that context, you use this gift not for yourself only, but also for our communities. And that's how we come up. That's how we move, that's how we lessen this gap that has stripped us from so many opportunities, that has caused inequity and divestment in our communities, is because the few of us who got to the other side, stayed there, and never threw a bone, planted a seed, did anything, because we were so traumatized. So that's not an indictment on folks who, made it over and stayed made over and never looked back. But it's more of, let's acknowledge that trauma and fight it, and then go ahead and set up for the next person. I like to encourage my students, and I will tell you this, Drew, as you continue to craft your career, and be very clear, I'm still crafting my career. Do not look for a model. Nobody has done it like you are supposed to do it. And I have to tell myself that all the time, as I get these opportunities, as I get these offers and that sort of thing, or as I go after these things, I'm like, I don't know anybody who's done that. Great, do it. That's your litmus test. That is for you to do. Don't look for an exact replica, because we don't need that. It already exists. And so, as you craft your career, do what you are spirit-led to do, without looking for, has this ever worked before? Because that's when fear sets in, and that's when you stop showing up. That's when you don't send in the application. That's when you say, I'm not qualified for this. Why would I even apply? No, you are, you can, you will, and you'll be the first and perhaps the only to do it. And that's enough. I also, what's valuable and encouraging to me, and I hope encouraging to my students and mentees and all of those folks that I get to work with, is that you're not building a profession. You're not building a career. You're writing a narrative of who you are, and your career is a part of that. And so don't go into this thinking that you're going to be able to turn it off. Don't go into this thinking that I want to do this at work from 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, and then I want to come and have this whole, that doesn't serve you. Yep. Or our communities in the way that they deserve to be served. And so, as an educator, this is a whole part of who I am, and I never turn it off. And I understand that everything I do, I can't say, okay, I'm not your professor after 5 o'clock. I can do what I want to do. I can be this on Twitter, and all of that contributes to this narrative of who I am. Yep. At any moment, at any time. And I have to be clear about that and be intentional about that, because you never know when folks are going to look to you for not necessarily an example, but for some sort of beacon, right? You never know what that moment is. So you need to generate every moment as if that could be the moment that encourages somebody. That could be the moment that helps somebody make the decision they need to make. That could be the moment where they gain clarity about who they are supposed to be and how they are supposed to serve. And so, you don't want to be this disingenuous professional. Yeah. Where, this is just, there's this line. What is this? What is it from? Is it from New Jack City? It's not business. It's not personal. It's business. I don't know. Anyways, but it's always personal. It's always personal. And that doesn't mean that you get offended or you take things personally, but you give a personal touch to the type of professional you are. And that will guide you. That will be your code of conduct. Yep. That will keep you out of so much mess in the professional realm, because you understand that this is how I am representing. Yep. This is my whole full story. And I need to be very clear as to how that story is ministering and affecting other folks. That's part of the work.
Ebony, I want to throw something at you. That is such a great answer, because what you're getting at is authenticity. It's why we need to be authentic, why people need us to be ourselves. It is so important that we be ourselves. And one thing that I say all the time, and this is one thing as it relates to the subject of leadership, I always say this, I believe that every single person has a capacity and level of leadership. The reality is we think it always looks the same. But what you're talking
No.
about right now, literally, is you're explaining what leadership really is you actually coming to a place where you know who you are confident in yourself, and you actually understand that my narrative and my story is important to the narrative, greater narrative of making a difference in the world, and how I can contribute to that by doing the work that is necessary, by getting to know myself so that I can be an effective contributor to the story that we're trying to tell in the world. Ebony, that is phenomenal. And I think that when people listen to this and watch this, I hope that they will catch that and hold on to that, because more than anything right now, people are conforming based on what they believe is the actual way to get somewhere. Like,
Yeah.
it is so easy to conform. I even was talking to somebody about this, I think recently, and I'll let you respond, but I was talking to somebody about the fact that even in the quote unquote leadership space, and this is not what all I want to do, but this is an aspect of something I want to do, right? Get into leadership development, talk about leadership, do some coaching, motivational speaking, kind of be in that space. I was talking to somebody and they was asking me, who are the people that you listen to? And I literally, like, in a legitimate way, I mentioned some people that, are in the space, but I don't really listen to these people. You know why? Because I would get so caught up in being them and thinking that they are the formula and standard that I miss out being authentic where people actually need me to be. I'm not
Yeah.
Eric Thomas. I'm not Trent Shelton. I'm not John Maxwell.
Cool.
I'm not Miles Monroe. I'm not Les Brown. I'm not Lisa Nichols.
We
No,
already had them. We've
right.
already had them. Their legacies are still living and thriving and changing people's lives.
Exactly. And we spend so much time trying to be similar to these people that we forget to find out who we are. But
Yeah.
I, that is literally, if there's any message that I will give to people for the rest of my life, is to teach them how to value themselves, so they will never ever allow people to tell them what they can and what they cannot be. If we
Okay, for
learn
sure.
to value ourselves, oh my God, we're about to say, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. And if we get down to like the spiritual and biological nature of it, the fact that we each have these individual thumbprints.
Yes.
And no one else has that, right? Like, to me, that is just this lovely reminder that there is something that I can contribute that nobody who has ever existed can contribute. Woo. And, the world will try to convince you that that's not valuable,
Yeah.
that doesn't matter, that is not worth honing, that's not worth cultivating. And that's a lie. It's always going to be a lie. And let's say you fail, so what?
Right.
Because people learn. I would venture to say folks learn a lot more from failures than they do from successes.
Yes. Yes.
So,
That's so good. Well, I'm gonna wrap this conversation up because, Ebony, there have been so many moments where in this conversation I was like, we can really go there, but we don't have the time. So let me get to my final three questions, and we have to bring you back. I think
I look forward to it. I'm here.
yes, there's been so many things that we could have talked about that I didn't even get a chance to talk about with you, but they're so great. So because you're an educator, I know you're always reading something. You're always trying to get some new information, or just get a new narrative, or figure out a new story. What are some of the things that you're reading or listening to, or gotten involved in to try to elevate your mind and elevate your perspective about the world?
Whew, okay, I am always reading. Sometimes it's for work, other times it's not so much. Right now, though, I'm reading Long Division by K.S.A. Lehman, Jackson, Mississippi author, and it's a a new release of an older novel that he wrote. So I'll actually be talking to him on June 1st about this release. And Mouthful of Blood is a collection of Toni Morrison essays and speeches that I've read before, but this compilation just has this sort of bent of resistance that I'm really inspired by. And listening, I'm assuming you mean like music, right?
Yeah, like, if there might be or podcasts or things that you're listening to, obviously, we have to nourish ourselves in so many ways,
Yeah,
especially now.
that's true. So in terms of music, I have been listening to a few artists who I think all connect on this notion of being culturally intentional, like spiritually grounded. So King is a group that I don't even think exists anymore. I think they
Disbanded.
separated, but yeah, King is the name of the group, and their 2016 album I've gone back to, and it's just been on a loop for me. We Are King is the name of that album, and I think that I am inspired. I was inspired to go back to that album by another novel that I keep reading and rereading and rereading, which is She Would Be King by Y.A. Moore, a Liberian American sister who just wrote the novel of my life. I'm obsessed with it. Um, Also, listening to a little bit of Toby Nwigwe.
Oh yeah, Toby. Woo! Toby.
Fire, fire,
Oh,
fire.
that boy, my God.
Yeah, him and his wife. So I'm really inspired by the messaging in
Oh, yeah.
their work. And I think that, I mean, it's pivotal, it's groundbreaking, really, what they're doing. And so, and then it's just fire. So
Yeah,
I'm enjoying it.
and to your and just to, an addendum to that, I actually got to see him live a few years ago. He came to our church and during our conference, and I had never heard of him, and he came and went off. I was like, this dude, who is this dude?
Amazing.
I'm like, this brother is, and
Yeah.
he is so powerful, and
An artist in any sense of the word.
yes,
Yeah.
and the way he articulates our narrative in a such profound and powerful way, where it is not causing people to feel a lot of pain. I mean, he's talking about the pain, but it's like liberating. It's very much,
Yeah.
it has this type of I don't know what the right word I want to use, but it has a type of soulful flavor to it that is very, very empowering, and very, very much so like it's almost like we're a tribe, and he's like the tribal leader, and screaming and pumping energy into the
Yeah.
and pushing the people to recognize who we are,
For
while
sure.
acknowledging the fact that this is something that's real, that's happening. And I'm gonna talk about it, but I'm gonna talk about it in a way that takes the power out of what happened, but actually elevates the realities that we can overcome that problem, and we are winning in the process. So that's all I had to say about that. I'm sorry.
Yabo, yabo, which is Swahili for yes. So yes.
Right.
Yes. All of that. To all of that.
So, which you've already touched on this a little bit, but how are you paying it forward? I know you have your entrepreneur venture, which is incredible. I've seen all your art; it's fantastic. The things you do for moms is bomb.com, and you're an awesome.
Thank you.
Tell Lucky Love I said hello, and
I will. They just tried to sneak in my
I,
children.
I
So
saw, I saw. Uh, but how are you paying it forward, Ed?
Drew, I try to pay it forward with every fiber of my being. And so my career is not my own. I'm very intentional about building an academic legacy at an historically Black institution. So at this point, I've worked for both HBCUs in our city, and that's intentional and that's meaningful to me, and it's a sacrifice as a scholar because our schools are underfunded, they're under resourced, and so they oftentimes cannot afford the scholars that they deserve.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it, because I realized that there were people that made that sacrifice to be at Spelman when I was there, and had they not been there, my life would not have been changed in that space in the way that it was, if they had not been there. And so part of my paying it forward is just being intentional about serving my community in my career, in my nonprofit pursuits, in any sort of capital venture, everything that I will do, how I spend my money, how we invest, is to affirm my belief, my fundamental belief of the capability and the aptitude of Black people, which has been historically denied all over the world. And so that's important to me. It becomes hashtags for some folks, and that's fine. It's not diminishing them. But for me, it is important that I'm raising, children who have that awareness, that confidence that they were fearfully and wonderfully made intentionally. And that is a valuable aspect to how they will serve the world. And so, yeah, paying it forward through lots of community service, representation on boards. Every board position that I accept is because I know I'm bringing my people into the room.
Yeah.
Right. That I will hopefully be a voice for folks who never made it into this room and who no longer are in this realm, folks who need to be in this room later on, for representation that needs to exist in all of these different spaces. And everything I do is really associated with the arts and the humanities, but I think that's a space where our people have been denied representation, and thus the opportunity and the privilege to document our stories. And so that's just how I'm shaping up who I am. And it is as simplistic as what I wear, how I wear my hair, and as complex as what I write and research and publish.
Yeah. So my last and final question, which I always consider is a fun question, and I think you might have already told me this, but who knows what you might say in this moment. So what song would you use to describe yourself and why?
A song that I would use to describe myself. Oh, that's a hard one. Let's see. So
Listen, I'm about to tell you something super funny.
That's a tough question. I wasn't prepared.
I realize this question has always tripped people up because I've gotten some funny answers. I've gotten Nuck If You Buck to
That's probably the song. That one, Cry Mom, Nuck If You Buck.
To literally You Made a Way by Travis Green. So I've gotten the gambit.
Yeah. Let's see. A song to describe myself. That is such a tough one, but it's probably a conglomerate of, like, if I could do a mashup.
Sure.
Of maybe Coltrane's version of In a Sentimental Mood. Crime Mob, Nuck If You Buck. I'm gonna steal that from whoever is right. So we mashing this up. And then For Women by Nina Simone.
Okay. Wow. I mean,
that's quite a mashup.
It's quite a quite a mashup. But it is encompassing of who you are. Well, Ebony, Dr. Lumumba, thank you for coming on and talking to me, family. I love you so much. And this was such a great conversation. And I hope people are so inspired by what you have to say, and they will recognize that they can make a contribution to the world and be significant. So thank you, Eb.
Thank you, Drew, for having me, for wanting me here. I've enjoyed this, and I'm just so proud of you. So whenever you need me, holler.
Thank you for watching and or listening to this week's episode of Leading with Lee. If you have not done it yet, subscribe today on YouTube and all podcasting platforms. To get more information about me and what I'm doing, email me at scottconsultations@gmail.com or follow me on social media on Twitter and especially Instagram at Lee A. Scott II or Lee A. Scott II. Thank you for watching this week's episode. I really appreciate it. Much love, and let's get started.